Larry, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, good.
Okay, welcome to the Canby Planning Commission, Monday, May 24th, 2021. I'll say the invocation. Dear Lord, please bless these commissioners. Give them the wisdom to make the right decisions and keep them healthy so that they can do these meetings. Say the pledge with me, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm Commissioner Larry Boatwright, standing in for Chair John Sabre tonight. And do we have any citizen input on non-agenda items?
This is Eric. I don't believe we have any citizens in the meeting tonight.
Okay. Then we'll go to approving the minutes for the May 10th, 2021 meeting. Has everybody looked at the minutes for that meeting? Or has anybody not? Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Mr. Chair, this is Jeff Mills. I'll move to approve.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Oh, the minutes for May 10th, 2021 have been approved. Now we'll go on to a brief work session. Okay, Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
And Commissioner Boatwright, this is Don Hardy. I'm going to go ahead and start it out. I do have our staff on as well to also provide input tonight. And we wanted to take the opportunity tonight to speak with you all the commissioners here, since we don't have any hearing items. And I've identified 5 items to cover tonight. We want to keep this short to value your time tonight, but we thought it'd be worthwhile to go through this with you. We've never really asked the questions that we're asking on some of these, and we felt it would be good to do so. So the 5 questions that we have are, we would like to cover what we can do better to provide information to the Planning Commission and our staff reports and PowerPoints. It's the first item, and I'll go back to these after I cover all of them. Secondly, we wanted to cover our need to document Planning Commission findings, both approvals and denials. Third, we'd like to discuss the number of hearings we're going to be having this summer. They're starting to increase. 4, to cover continuances and requests for continuances. We've talked to legal counsel on this recently, and we have some additional information that we thought would be helpful for the Planning Commission. And then finally, if there would be value in doing additional work sessions or trainings for Planning Commission staff. So those are the items that we had, and we want this to be an open dialogue format for all. And so I wanted to start out with our first item, which is, are there things that we could be doing better with our staff reports and PowerPoints? We know sometimes they're rather long, at least our staff reports. And are there things that might be beneficial that you guys and gals would be finding valuable that we could do to make things easier, or any suggestions for improvements?
Anybody got a comment?
This is Commissioner Mills. I'll start it off. Things that could be improved, and I know this is a tall order, and that would be, especially when you put out, the last document was 800 pages, and we got it like on the Friday before, at the end of the work week before the week before. So we were given, 9 days to look at it. That sounds like a lot, but some of us have jobs and other things and other commitments. So earlier is better. I know you're probably doing the best you can now, so I'm not expecting a vast improvement there, but I do have one specific item. Every packet includes a table of contents that says this is where this is at, and this is where this is at, and this is where this is at. and they uniformly have been incorrect, wrong on every planner's package. The page numbers do not line up with the documents. And so you spend a lot of time going to the wrong place when you're trying to find stuff. And if you could improve that part of the document, that single page item that says this is where stuff is at, that would be very helpful.
Thank you. And on the length, thank you, Commissioner Mills. On the length of our staff reports, do you think that they're too lengthy, or what are your thoughts on that?
No, I don't have a criticism of the length of the staff reports. The staff reports have to be what they have to be. And I'm not, generally they're excellent in quality. I don't have any big criticisms of the staff reports per se, except we've had a case where there was some key documents that the staff had, but they weren't included. I'm talking about plats for subdivisions. That was made available later, but later's not before the meeting.
Sure.
So, but by and large, they're very good. I'm not telling you to make them shorter. It's a painful thing for me to say, but they have to be what they have to be. I just feel like the organization could be better, not so much in the staff report, which I think is pretty well done. But when you have a 50-page staff report in a 600-page package, and there's a table of contents that has a dozen items that says this is on this page and this is on this page, and after the first 3 items, which are correct, the next 7 are not. Mm-hmm. And so you're looking for stuff and it's not there, or you're looking for stuff, and oftentimes, as you know, it's in multiple places in those documents. So you could be looking at in one place and another place. And you, as someone who's trying to work your way through the background information, I worry that sometimes I'm not looking at the best version of the document that staff would have me look at, for example, because there might be various versions of something, because that document that you provide us is kind of a history of what's happened in development of that project. So that table of contents, and I understand the rush to get this out. I think I understand. I want you to know I try to appreciate the rush to complete documents to get them out to us. And I understand that that's a Herculean task sometimes. But improving that table, I'm using the term table of contents directory, would help me. It would save me some time and make me more efficient in my review of the documents.
Appreciate your comments, and those are all excellent. Commissioner Mills and others, any other suggestions? And that would include our PowerPoint presentations as well, so beyond the staff reports.
I actually think the staff reports are good. I think that some of the confusion comes in the actual applicant packet, and that things are referenced differently between the staff report and the applicant packet. And I think that might be where Commissioner Mills is getting confused. So it might be helpful if there's maybe a summary page or something that makes it easier to reference some of those things. But I think that your staff reports are pretty thorough. I haven't had a problem with when I have a question that's deeper in to go find it. But I also may approach things differently than some of the other commissioners. So, but as far as that goes, I think you guys do a great job. I know that it's statutory how much notice and when the packet has to get out. So that's part of it. I almost wonder if would be better to do it in 2 portions so that the staff report is all together and then all the reference materials are separate, so that it's easier to go between the 2. Maybe have, that's what I like to do, is have them both open on different screens. If I can, sometimes I'll open it twice so I can have the staff report open and then can have the reference materials and not have to keep scrolling up and down. So that might be an easier way to do it, kind of a part A, part B. Because honestly, I will lose my place if I'm trying to do it all in one document.
Thank you, Commissioner, trying to do that. Excellent comments. Others?
This is Jason. I have a quick question. what is the normal time between when one of these requests comes into planning and then the packet is generated and sent to us?
Great question. So there's a push by the applicant to get these to hearing as quickly as possible. I mean, that's one of those items. I think generally speaking, we're trying to, from our fully complete process, which we have to go through the first 30 days, we generally try to schedule these within about 60 days. It's not perfect, and sometimes it's 70, sometimes it might be 80, but we're generally trying to schedule these in about 60 days out. I'd say that would be a very good mark. It's probably more around the 70-day range, and applicants are still wanting that to be faster, even though I think we're processing things faster in Canby than most of the other jurisdictions that we're comparable to. Did that answer your question, Commissioner Fadden?
It did, and as a follow-up, so when that packet hits your desk or your folks' desk, and then you start going through it, the clock starts for the 60 to 70 days. If you have to go to them and say, hey, we need additional information, yada, yada, then then it takes them some time to get it back to you. You have to go back through it. And so really that 60 to 70 days might only be 30 days by the time you get everything all done to then put out the finished work. Is that a correct assumption?
It actually is really the other end of it. So if somebody submits and in 30 days, they don't have everything and it takes them 2 more weeks and then that's another week to review that, we don't really start that 60 days until it's complete. So we're not shortening that down. And these complicated projects oftentimes are not fully complete the first time. But if somebody can bring in a solid package, or maybe it's really on the applicant's end, once we review these, we try to be fair in terms of reviewing what's required and what's substantive versus what could be conditioned on an application. But some of these truly they're not ready for prime time. And what you guys don't see is our efforts to try to make them for prime time. And sometimes applicants still struggle, to be honest with you, even after we work with them repeatedly. And so there's kind of a backstory to these that happens. But that 60 days from fully complete on that process. So that, if it takes them 45 days to get to fully complete, then essentially, it's going to take another 60 days to get to roughly the Planning Commission.
Okay.
Any other comments or recommendations? And I'm specific, are the PowerPoints okay? I guess just to that point, are you guys having good information there? And
the PowerPoints are good. I guess I'm from a different atmosphere where I did my first round of planning commission duty, where the planning staff did not make the presentation for the developer. And the developer was expected to make their own presentation. I wonder if you put too much pressure on yourselves to do too much when these people when the companies coming in can make their own presentations. What we need from you, and sometimes it's hard, you have to read between the lines to find out what you really think, because I feel like sometimes you're trying to make a presentation for the developer in your staff report instead of telling us what you really think.
And those are great comments. And let me unpack that. I'll unpack that a little bit. I think first comment is that what we're trying to do, and I've got other questions later here, but we're going to kind of jump around a little bit. I think part of what we're really trying to get to is our code requires us to do extensive review. It just does. And so no matter how much the applicant ends up putting together, we're going to need to address that in our code, which is quite substantial in terms of addressing approval criteria. That's kind of the first item to recognize. But what I think is important is, and just jumping ahead here a little bit, is would it be helpful kind of towards our end slides to have something that says kind of re-summarizes, which we try to do everything anyway, but these are your approval criteria for this project. And this is what the Planning Commission needs to make a decision on, for or against the project tonight. And to kind of, because I think my concern is that we give you so much information that it's not maybe necessarily clear as to when we get to the end of this thing, that it's like you've got 5 criteria and it kind of boils it down into those items. And so that would be, I don't know if that's helpful on that. So that's one question. And then to respond to the other part, I would love applicants to take more responsibility. That has not been the history necessarily of Canby. So we're working on that as staff. We're trying to make their ownership a little greater for applicants, because that's typical in most jurisdictions, as the applicant does have a much higher standard, and planning staff typically gives a fairly generic presentation and the applicant has to really kind of sell the project more. It's my experience on that. But to that point of going back to, are there some things we could do to really kind of, once we've gone through this, fairly laborsome presentation, where we could summarize and say, here's what you're being asked, Planning Commission, to make a decision on tonight as a recast.
So if I may, I have some questions about, or I have some thoughts on the PowerPoint.
Okay.
So I have to tell you that most PowerPoints that I watch make me want to gouge my eyes out. PowerPoint was never invented to put tons and tons of text on it and put it up and read it verbatim. Every time that happens, I just want to scream to the heavens. But that's just how it works. So when it comes down to the PowerPoints, bullet points with succinct information, not necessarily complete sentences, but like paragraphs of information in a PowerPoint, mean that there's something else going on there that needs to be referenced. So whether that's in the PowerPoint, we are talking about this item and it references this page in your packet, fine. But there should not be 3 slides in a PowerPoint that consists of 2 paragraphs of information. It just becomes too much on the screen. So that's sort of my pet peeve when it comes to PowerPoint. It's to help direct you towards an idea or the information, not regurgitate the information that's in the packet that we've received. As far as raising the bar for developers and their presentations to this board, I think that, and granted, I'm new to the commission, there might be other commissioners that think differently of this, but I say we need to expedite that process. Things are only going to get more complicated as the city grows and develops. And clearly, the city is a very desirable place to be. And so if people want to come here, then we need to be, if developers want to come here, and businesses want to come here, they need to bring their A game, just like they do with Lake Oswego and Beaverton and all these other places. Just because we're little Canby doesn't mean that we need to hold their hands any differently than any other place. So that might sound ultra harsh, but I see it when we do the budget committee about how, developers we're not even collecting enough fees from development to help pay for the Planning Commission, yet we are holding their hand through this process. So they're getting extra benefit and not paying nearly as much as other places. So I'm all for saying, okay, developers, today we are moving this bar up a notch and you need to start bringing your A game to this meeting. Because quite frankly, the last couple of presentations, the few presentations that I've been on so far as a commissioner, there has been very little information coming out of the applicants. It's mostly coming out of staff. And when the applicants do talk, we end up talking about moving stoplight poles and all of that stuff. And that is things that those are traps that need to be caught in the beginning before they come this far, so that we aren't saying no to everything and then having them go on to city council and push to try and get it approved.
And Commissioner Patton, just great comments. And the order here, I guess, is kind of the sequence of what we've always traditionally done, is give our staff report and then the applicant does present. I'm just trying to figure out like what we could do to advance that. Obviously, starting at pre-application process and telling applicants this is what you're going to need to start doing. But in terms, the structure, I guess, is that it's an educational process. I mean, that's what I'm really kind of getting to here, because I don't think that's been the norm, and that's been challenging here. And I think what happens is applicants, they are largely listening to what we're saying, and we do have to go through that. I'm struggling a little bit with, we can educate them on that and tell them this is something you're really going to need to address specifically to the Planning Commission. I think there's a message being told by the fact that when they get to the review process, there's an understanding that they perhaps did not have before. But we would absolutely like to, in advance of that, make people aware of what that is. I'm just also wondering, like, should there be more Q&A? And that's part of what some of my other questions are going to lead into is, you know, where would you rather have more things to ask them about, or should they be, I'm just trying to find the balance here of like, what is the preference for the Planning Commission on questions that come to the applicant?
Well, and I guess, you know, back to what I was saying, part of the problem is maybe I don't completely understand the process, and maybe I need to do a little of my own homework and see and watch various Planning Commission meetings for other municipalities around this area to see how they do it. I mean, if I don't know if other commissioners have done that, if the Planning Commission or the Planning Department has sort of watched how other cities are doing their process and how we can either borrow from them or improve. I don't know I don't know if that has happened, but I guess as a note for myself, as an action item, I need to participate or at least attend some of these other Planning Commission meetings to see just how others are doing it. Because I have to believe that in other municipalities that there are some equally as complicated developments going on, and, you know, see how they deal with it.
Commissioner Patton, maybe Commissioner Hutchinson has his hand up. Maybe you might have some other things to add to that discussion. Do you mind if we switch over to him? Okay. Commissioner Hutchinson, please.
I just wanted to add a couple of things to mention about the packet and the PowerPoint. As far as the packet goes, there's some, I'm not sure that I need the granular data about the traffic study. You know, and in the interest of full disclosure, I know that this packet has to, you know, is responsible to the public in a certain way, and there's certain information that has to get across. But I'm not sure that I need the corner by corner data of the traffic study as opposed to the engineer's summary of that. Maybe there's a way that you can provide a link to those resources for people that need it. I'm not sure if that would actually clarify things or make things simpler, but I was just, if you're looking for ways to cut bulk out of the report, that seems like a likely place. As far as the as far as the PowerPoints go, I tend to agree with Commissioner Patton. To a degree, I really like the way that PowerPoint can enhance the conversation. So when you put up images, the overhead views, the plan views, and illustrations that you're talking about at the time, I think that is very, very helpful. And also, I like your idea of having a summary at the end that clearly lines out what it is we're voting on. And if we could have that up while we vote, I think that would be fantastic. That's just going to mean a little bit of quick stepping on your part. If we come up with some provisional vote over the course of the meeting, then you'll have to figure out a way to display it in the interest of being consistent. That's all I have at this point.
Thank you, Commissioner Hutchinson. And Commissioner Patton, just back, I just wanted to get Commissioner Hutchinson's comments. Back to your comments, I just wanted to circle back with you. I think that part of this is a little bit of an evolutionary process on our end. We will absolutely try to push. We agree with you. We agree with commissioners. Push the applicants forward to make them more accountable and to push that envelope so that there's a higher bar for them to come back and And maybe what we need to do on our end, back to Commissioner Hutchinson, is tell the applicants that as well, that here is your script that we're giving you as in the pre-app process early on in the process. And when you get to hearing, you get to speak to these approval criteria, and we want to hear those from you, which then parallels back to the Planning Commission. And that's part of the challenge, I think, just generally is my observation is, we're giving a staff summary, a lot of information. The applicant's not really addressing the approval criteria. Planning Commission's not necessarily sure what to do with that. And so then it becomes a little bit ambiguous as to what's happening here. And sometimes applicants are also not really amenable to like looking at things more broadly. And so it creates this kind of like loggerhead that we can't surpass. So I think getting to the point of having that consistent dialogue about the approval criteria, both from the applicant's perspective and staff's perspective, I think will help the Planning Commission know perhaps more what to ask or drill down into. Does that make sense, Commissioner Madden? Great. Any other comments on that? Other improvement areas that you guys can think about? I'll move on if not.
I do have something to say on the PowerPoints as well.
Sure.
I think that, excuse me. I think that if there was a template or something that, so you could give that to them, to the applicant in the beginning and say, okay, you're going to be presenting, this is your time frame. You can have X amount of slides. I mean, I don't want this to turn into something where I want them to be able to give us enough information, but I also don't want it to turn into a dog and pony show where we have to sit through 140 slides. So I want some control over the situation so that it's like that you have this amount of time, you can get this information out to us, and almost to the point of they need to send it to you ahead of time so that you're running the show. We're not letting them, click through on their own, so to speak. I think that would be an important part of it. And I agree. In the time that I was doing land, sorry, dog. In the time that I was working with Luba, that's what I saw from a lot of the other municipalities, was that the applicant has to speak for themselves, and the planning department was there as kind of a guidance and kind of keeping things balanced, and they were our voice, and this is what we're aiming for. Then they would tell their story, and then the Planning Commission would guide back into, okay, so these are the points, this is what they've covered. Last week's meeting, for example, I felt that they didn't give us the information that you asked them for. And I think that you're kind of the clearinghouse for that to get us the information we need. But it seemed like they did a lot of pushback on that, and that's why they didn't get approved.
Excellent points, and thank you for that. And I think that the script part, I like that idea behind helping them kind of understand what the end product is here, and kind of helping them help themselves to be and be prepared. I mean, I think largely
recording in progress.
Sorry, I just had a message that popped up. Excellent points. Thank you for those. Any other comments on the PowerPoint or staff report? If not, I'll move on. Yeah.
In the future, it would be nice to get the PowerPoints because a lot of the time during the meeting, I'm going back and forth between the documents that you provided, and I may miss a slide or two. But other than that, like last meeting's packet, it was very thorough. It was a little hard to flip through like 600 pages of info, but it was very thorough. And reviewing ahead of time, I was already feeling a little uneasy about the project, just seeing how thorough it was, and it was like, well, this is questionable, and so many things were questionable. I wouldn't say I had my mind up, but I was leaning in one direction already from reviewing the packet. And I don't mind that it is so thorough. I prefer it to be thorough so that I can, come up with wrap my mind around it before your presentation. That's all.
Thank
I'd
you.
agree with Commissioner Hebe about the thoroughness. I also really like the idea of getting a copy of the PowerPoint in advance. I think that'd be great. And to back up what Commissioner Trundy was saying, I think we need to find a way to make as we've said, make the developers make their own presentation and put a time limit on it. I mean, they don't get endless time to make their presentation, and that's part of their preparation to make sure they get the points across that they need to get across. But in the end, you don't want them coming before us and say, yeah, what the staff said is really what we wanted to say, and we're good with that. When that happens, you've gone too far. You don't want them saying that. You want them saying, oh, wait a minute, we got to talk about this and this and this, because these are important. And this is what's really going to be great about this project for the city. You want them to make those things. You don't want a big sales job, but you want some. You want them to tell you why it's important and what they're doing that is good, and why they think it's a great project. And they need to speak for themselves. So I know that's been said, but there it is again.
Those are Commissioner Trundy and Commissioner Mills. Those are all excellent points. And it's more what I'm typically used to in other jurisdictions. And I think you're making excellent points. And that will be something staff will take and work with the applicants on that. I think the one item on our PowerPoints, which those typically are developed after we put the staff reports together. And again, maybe this comes down to lengthening the time period to get all that to you, so it's all at once. So what I'm saying is we're developing the PowerPoint before we get to the meeting, but if they came together, that might mean lengthening to get to a hearing, but you would also have better information.
I wouldn't mind just having the PowerPoint maybe emailed out on Monday or the Friday before, because I don't need to read the PowerPoint when I'm going through the staff report. I'd rather have it, with the most current information, because I know sometimes we do have public comments and stuff that comes in later. And I would just rather be able to look at it and reference it during the meeting. Sometimes I need to Zoom. I would like, if you're going to have criteria for them, to have a minimum font size. I think there's some of those things so there's standards, like this is what we're expecting. Please don't print yellow on white background. Please, don't have a size 8 point font, things like that just, so there's guidelines, because anything that they do for any application process moving beyond us, I mean, it's very specific you must submit this in 12-point font in Times New Roman, because they want it to be readable. And I don't think there's anything wrong with us requesting things to be legible and readable. And then I had another point and my dog started barking. She loves these meetings. The other thing would be having them get it to you ahead of time so that you can look at it and review it. I forgot what I was going to say. I might pop back in and say something, but I lost my train of thought.
Go ahead, Jade.
Along Commissioner Trendy's thought process there with minimums, if we're telling them, that here is the template, we can create the template and it'll have the font size and the colors and everything in it. And you can also embed in each slide a time. And, they put their information in and you say you have X number of minutes to get through these number of slides, and it advances for you after a certain amount of minutes. And that is one way to keep them moving. That might be a little drastic, but you have that ability as well.
Good points. And I just a comment, obviously I would love everyone to use that. For those that decide like, hey, I'm not really wanting to do a PowerPoint, are you okay with an alternative that like still addresses the criteria? I mean, because we're going to get different people that are doing different things. I mean, I agree with everything you guys have said. It's just kind of forcing somebody to do something might not be universally accepted.
For me, anything other than an alternative, like an what was it? Like an expressive dance in the council chamber. Anything other than that, I'm fine with. Big post-it notes.
It depends on who's dancing.
Interpretive dancing. That's what I was thinking. Yes.
It depends on who's doing the dancing, Jason. It could be interesting.
Be careful. Be careful.
Yes.
I remember what I was going to say. So I feel that oftentimes when it gets to the point of the applicant presenting to us, there's already been questions and answers and information exchanged between staff and the commission. And I feel that a lot of times by the time we get to that point, the applicant is kind of playing defense. They're kind of on the defense. And so they don't get the opportunity to present to us in a positive manner. And maybe that's something we need to switch up when the questions come or part of the conversation, because I really have felt lately, and part of it last week, I'll own that. But I feel like they're playing defense and they're not really able to put their best foot forward. So if we have them present maybe in the beginning of this is what we'd like to do, and then we have the staff report be, okay, this is what they presented to us. This is our findings. This is what we would like you to share. And then we can have discussion, and then we can have them come back for questions and answers after the community has made their questions. I just feel like that's a little bit friendlier and a more positive environment.
And those are really great suggestions. I've seen a lot of hearings that go that way, where that's not how we obviously have done them, but where the applicant gets to make the first presentational part of this, and then it's brief. And if they're generally in agreement with the staff report, it does create that kind of positive tone. But I mean, I'd like to hear from our other staff, but I think that has some merit to it, that would be giving them that, also kind of putting them out front so they're not like kicking back and waiting for this long presentation that staff is doing. It kind of puts them a little bit more in the up front on this. I guess the only question on the order would be that they still have the equal opportunity to address questions, and that maybe that's what you're getting to, is that a brief presentation by applicant followed by staff presentation followed by questions of applicant, and then it's those that are speaking for or against the project.
And then I don't mind giving them 5 minutes at the end for rebuttal or something. I think that's a more likely, almost Robert's Rule of Order type of process of they present, then the staff presents, then we do questions, then we do community input, and then they have a chance to rebut. I think that's kind of a nice flow, and that last little bit I think it would be a more positive environment for everybody. And I think that it would give us kind of an overview of, okay, what are they trying to accomplish here? And we might get prettier pictures.
Gotcha. And so I think how we implement this, and we have hearings that are up and coming that are probably, we need to kind of figure out when this is going to be, where if we were to start to change that up. Commissioner Trundy, Eric, did you have something that you were?
Yeah, I think that I like what I've heard so far from everybody, and I think this is good work to improving the processes for both staff and the commission. My experience, especially in Lane County, followed that applicant staff rebuttal questions type format. And I was also, this this process in Canby was a little new for me, where staff was kind of carrying a lot of the water, I guess, so to speak, on some of these projects. And I mean, I would support and think we could do something like that, where the applicant basically starts off with their presentation demonstrating to you all why they meet the criteria. And hopefully a little less fluff and a little more substance on why it is they meet the criteria, because that's ultimately what we're here to do. And I just wanted to mention that I thought that would be a good way to maybe morph how we do these. I don't think there's no bylaws or code that specifically states we have to do them the way that we're doing them. So that's just a little my thought on what I've heard so far. Also, one other thing is, I also have somewhat, this is more directed to Commissioner Mills' initial comments about table of contents. I don't know, that's a new task for us with Lainey gone. So it's been a bit of a struggle, and I've been trying to figure out why they're not aligning correctly. And I think there might be I think Commissioner Trundy had mentioned something between what the applicant is describing as an exhibit versus what staff is describing as an exhibit, and then they don't match up, and then the numbers are like off. But it's not useful to you all if you can't find what you're looking for. So, and then, by transitive property, it's not useful for really anybody. So to the extent that it's possible, I certainly will look into trying to clean that up. I also like the idea of separating the staff report from, basically you have your staff report and all of your exhibits and attachments in a separate document. That way you can look and compare. So that's it, Don.
Thank you, Eric. And I think, we will follow, we got a few other things to cover tonight, but we will follow back up with you all about, so you're, especially with Chair Boatwright. I know John is recovering still. Commissioner Savory's recovering. He talked to me this morning, said he needs a couple more weeks. He's on the mend, and he'll probably be back in action in a few weeks. But we'll make sure. I like the conversation as well. That's what I'm used to. And as Eric just echoing what he said, I think that does create a different atmosphere. And I also think it probably makes it clear as to what the real issues are. We have to cover everything, the multitude of all the aspects because of our code, but it would kind of boil it down more, I think, and make the applicant more responsible, which I do agree is important. So all great comments, and we'll make the follow-up back to Planning Commission will be, when we're looking at implementing this, and I think that probably could be on the 14th. I think that we probably won't. Well, I guess the whole thing about getting the applicant to present, whether they have a PowerPoint or not, but we could. We'll talk internally with staff, but I think that may be achievable to even start at that soon.
I would definitely have it be that any applications that come in, say after June 1st, because that's right around the corner, get the new set of instructions.
Exactly. And thank you. Just part of it is trying to just figure out how to implement this and do it in a way that the people that are new, because we do actually have a bunch of that, it's constant, it's coming in. And so that it's kind of a fairness issue to them. But I think we'll talk internally and circle back with the commission.
One other thing that I have, especially with the Zoom meetings, is that there's so many people sometimes on the hearings, and it would be helpful. I don't want to do an introduction in the beginning or anything like that, but it would be nice to know who is there with the applicant and who is there with the community. And I don't know if there's some kind of little icon we can stick on their Zoom, or if we can put an initial in front of their name, or an asterisk if they're the applicant, or something, just so that we can kind of tell who people are. And then the other thing I would really like to see is that whoever's playing administrator and hosting the meeting use the mute all button, because it gets really distracting Especially last time, I felt like there was a lot of background noise from applicants and community members while the staff was talking. And I found that incredibly distracting to have people not muted. And I think it should be mute all. If you need to speak, you unmute yourself and then remute yourself.
Those are all great points. I think especially on the mute thing is an easy one. And I don't know if we always know who all's on the call either, but to the extent we can do that, I think it would, everything Commissioner Trundy mentioned, though, the applicant speaking first will start to maybe make that feel better as well, because they're obviously going to have to reveal their team. And then whoever's left is either for or against the project or just wanting their, maybe they're just watching a hearing. The virtual thing has been challenging.
It has been, and I live on Zoom, so.
Yeah. And so,
Well,
yeah.
and as far as that identification, and I'm not sure what the limitations are. So when you look at these little windows, like in my little window, it says Jason Patton because I have typed to display myself as Jason Patton. Whether they can put applicant or community. Granted, not all of them are going to sort that out, but if it can at least be said, okay, when you type your name in to join the meeting, we ask that you please follow this format, applicant and your full name. Because like you are listed as Hardy D. It's not your full name. So I don't know if that's a possibility as well.
Gotcha.
And maybe that's something we should do is be Commissioner Patton, Commissioner Trundy, Commissioner Mills.
Yeah.
That I have no problem doing that.
Yeah. I guess one of the requests, sorry. One of the requests I had, and if we go to Commissioner, that's fine. If we stay with Jeff Mills, my name has been misspelled for ever since we've been doing this. And if you could get my name spelled correctly, I'd appreciate it.
I think that spelling is from when you first signed in.
I don't think so.
Really? Okay.
Because it's been correct at one point and then it's gone back to being incorrect. So
okay.
I don't have control over that. I don't think.
Huh.
Oh, you do? On Zoom?
I'm on other Zoom meetings, Jennifer, and they don't show up misspelled anywhere else.
Well, you can change yours. All you have to do is click on it and right click and then type in, it'll be rename will pop up and you can do it.
I'll try that later.
Yourself. Yep.
Well, I guess all I'm saying is I didn't set it up in the first place and I assume staff did. So.
What do the rich ones have 2 L's?
No, 2 F's.
Oh,
Yeah, on my screen, it's just when I hover over my face, there'll be like 3 different dots that pop up. And when I click on that, it says rename. And then I'm able to, then it brings up the dialog box to do that.
Well, I'm looking at it on my iPad right now and I'm not quite seeing how to do that, but I'll work on it. I don't see a rename anywhere here, but I'll keep looking.
So just one final thought, and Brianna brought this to our attention, which is great. That whole order thing actually is in our code 1689, the Planning Commission order. So we would need to go back and revise the code, which I think is a good idea. And there's a good rationale behind it. And I think that's a fairly easy one for us just to independently come back, but we need to take that back through you and through council to end up implementing that. So that was my fear, is like, I appreciate Brianna bringing that up, because I was like, is it open for us to do this? But the code actually codifies it in terms of what that procedure is. So that would have to be a change, which I don't have a problem with. I just want to let you guys know we can't like just immediately start doing this. So, but I think that's something I think it would be a great idea.
Fair enough. So I would say when you guys have time to do that, because I know you're super busy, just redraft the code so we can discuss it and vote on it.
Okay. Sounds good.
I don't know if we have to move on that and vote on it to have you redo that or not.
It would be something you would see anyway, I believe, because you'd have to make a recommendation to council on that as a legislative, as a code text, rather item. I think you would end up seeing that.
Yeah.
So that would come before you as automatically anyway. So I don't think you need to vote on that tonight, but we understand their support. It seems like across the planning commission. So I was going to move on to the next item. This is great conversation. Really appreciate it. And the next item kind of permeates a lot of what we were talking about, and that is the need for us to prepare findings for approvals and denials. And staff in particular has been struggling where there are denials of having a record where we're going back through and saying we're having to piece back the narrative, which is not always something that's easy to do in terms of identifying what was the basis of denial and then how does that relate back to the code, the city code on that. And I have a couple suggestions and wanted to open that up for discussion. The city council has a lot of things they have before them, not land use activities so much, but other things. And they generally, the mayor kind of goes around and asks for individual input from individual council members, and in that dialogue, which is part of the discussion process. I think the two things that would be important is, again, staff bringing forward, like, here are the criteria that are needed to approve or deny. And then for planning commission, for us in particular, would be really helpful. We understand not everything's going to get approved, but to have specific findings that relate to, for this reason, we are moving that this be denied. And that would be related to why it would not be in compliance with the code for whatever that is. Staff really wants to support the planning commission's position. It's, but we struggle, just to be honest, we struggle when sometimes there's not clear definition, that it isn't consistent with the code. And that makes it challenging for us when we go to city council. So we have to kind of go back through. So in some of these cases, we are totally on board with you guys. In other cases, we're saying that doesn't really match up with the code. The denial doesn't exactly match up. So that's part of that discussion we wanted to have with you guys, is maybe just having more dialogue, perhaps that restructuring back to having the applicant go first helps in part of that and starts to open that up, versus hearing our monologue that goes on. And then you guys go in essentially to almost a decision-making process because the applicant says so little. So that's just one of those things that we felt was important. And we wanted to get your thoughts around that. And I know sometimes these are difficult, and because we have items that come before you that have multiple applications, and we've looked at that. I have another item after this that where we're going to talk about those a little bit further. But I think to the extent we are going to try to limit those or not allow them at all when there's a type 3 and a type 4 application coming forward, it's just too complicated. And the code our code is not really good about addressing that. So I just wanted to open that up for discussion here on, are there ways that you guys could have more dialogue around, here's why I support this, or here's why I don't support this. That would be really helpful for us when we make our decision and finding documents that have to be forwarded. Either they're completed and you guys have authority and they're all done, or it goes to council on perhaps appeal. And Commissioner Mills, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I guess I feel like the part of the onus of as I understand it, Director Hardy, one of the things you're trying to do is make sure you get how we're deciding and what we're deciding, what is the basis for our decisions. And one of the things I think we have to own is we get through with the question and answers, and sometimes we go right to motions, and we go to emotions and then we don't have discussion. And I think, and I use the term discussion, I'm trying to refer to Robert's Rules of Order here. And one of the things that I try to do, especially when I'm going to be providing a negative vote, and I feel like consistently in our meetings, I have to pull the chair back and say, I'd like to say something before we go to a vote. And what I always try to do is I try to give my reasoning for why I might be voting against something, because I know that at some point staff's got to, understand what happened. And I think it's an important part of the meeting for the commissioners to state their position. And, in my experience, that usually happens around the time, usually before motion, sometimes after, but certainly there's a discussion period where everybody kind of says, yeah, I'm in favor or I'm not in favor. And you kind of get a sense of where the commission is at in terms of being able to summarize our position. For example, if it's going to go for appeal to wherever, you have to be able to write it up. That'd be my comment. I guess my comment is part of that onus comes back to the commission to do a better job as commissioners in running our meetings and making sure that the discussions happen, the positions are stated before the votes are taken.
And Commissioner Mills, the call for the question, I see that a lot with the city council. They do that a lot. So, they call for the question. And I think even before that, if staff, I don't think there's hesitancy at all of asking staff more questions, but we're glad to be that sounding board as well when that gets into it. Let's say the hearing's closed, but staff is there just offering that, not to say that this planning commission needs to do one way or another with that, but that we are also there to guide that process.
This is Jason. I have a question. Is there something to so if we say we're not approving this particular item and the folks in the planning department have questions, is there something that precludes you from saying, hold on a second, Commissioner Patton, you are voting no, we just need to clarify as to why that is?
And we can do that. Part of what I'd like to see is more of the discussion piece. And there's a cadence to this as well. And some of these go faster than others, but our preference would be that as you guys get into that discussion, and it's kind of a community discussion really, because sometimes there'll be somebody saying this aspect I don't like, and then somebody has a completely different idea on another commissioner, and there's no discussion necessarily around that first person's idea, about, and if they could more systematically go through that discussion with the planning commission about how are you guys feeling about this and have that more broad discussion. I think that's the appropriate point where staff should interject. It's kind of I think we probably could interject, but it's kind of like, once you guys are at that point to make a decision, it's difficult for staff to intervene.
So that almost sounds like to me that is a training situation for us as commissioners. That we as commissioners need to be trained to say, if you're going to say no to this thing, you need to be sure to put this out here. Now, I know COVID has thrown a wrench into everything, but when I came onto this commission, essentially it was like, la-di-da, you're a commissioner now. Here's your first packet. Let's go to the mattresses. So, I don't know if there's other training that normally happens, but I would say that if not, that maybe that would be part of it.
And there is a planning commissioner handbook. And what I do understand is that previous times that there have been trainings with the planning commission, and I believe it's included our legal counsel. And I've talked briefly, our legal counsel's super busy, but I think it'd be valuable to have planning staff and legal counsel meet with the planning commission, whether that's virtually or not, to refresh and go through some of these items, about because the questions you're asking, I think, I would say in most of those cases, it would be real difficult for staff to come in at the last hour, last minute and interject unless there was something outrageous that you guys were doing. And so it really does feel like we have to have that dialogue beforehand. Like, what do you guys think of staff on this? This is the question here about like this parking adjustment that they're doing. What do are you in agreement with that? Or, what is that? And because to be honest, many times if there is a denial, it comes down to one or two issues. There may be 5 issues that are stated, but there really are 1 or 2 that are substantial enough that if this went to council or to LUBA later, that it's going to be like, sometimes it might be 1 issue. So, it's not really like 10 issues. Typically it's usually a few, and because the challenge is, if somebody's meeting the code, it's hard to say no, basically. I mean, that's how it's set up. I mean, it's intended to be like judicial in that sense that like you meet these clear and objective standards. Now, sometimes you guys are going to be dealing with more subjective discretionary standards than you are objective. But a lot of times you're dealing with clear and objective standards, although it does require judgment when there's a variation to that, and you guys can object to those. But those all probably would be good examples of maybe giving some scenario planning. And I can talk to our council and see if we could set something up where we could do a training. And that's my last question, that I'm not done with the other questions, but that's the end, the very last one. And I guess the question would be for you guys, what type, would that be Zoom, and how long, what would you guys prefer? Would that be something in the evening, or what would your preference be?
Yeah, I'm fairly flexible. I can make whatever works for everybody else work myself. So.
I'm not sure what you're asking.
I'm just saying,
Are you asking about you're providing an orientation for us?
Yeah, if there's like if there was a training, what would it, how long and like when how long and when would that work best for you all?
Well, there's other hands up ahead of mine, so I don't want to jump the queue here.
Mr. Trundy, please go ahead.
Well, my hand was up for a different reason, but I will address that. So I will say that has been one of my pet peeves is that people don't use the code to say why they are denying something, because I know what's going to happen down the road. So I've seen the sausage be made. So it ongoing, it bothers me when people are like, well, no. And then they don't say why. And it really needs to be why, because it violates this code, or because we can interpret our code, and LUBA will give us a great deal of deference if we cite the code, but if we're not citing the code, they don't. And so I almost feel it would be helpful if, and I don't want to put more on staff, but I almost feel it would be a helpful situation to say, okay, this is going to probably come up, as far as this is why we're doing some of these, and these are the codes that we're using to apply here, so that we have a reference to say, well, no, we don't like this, and we're not going to approve it because it doesn't meet the code saying that it has to have setbacks, blah, 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 so that we almost have a little cheat sheet of what the reasons can be. Because just like traffic, we say we don't want to do it because it's going to create more traffic. Well, if the traffic study shows that the traffic that's going to be created are within the allowable parameters, then us saying we don't want it because we don't want more traffic in Canby, which I feel like we hear almost every meeting, then it's not really a valid reason to deny it. It's going to create more traffic. Well, yeah, but it's going to take us from an A to a B or a B to a C, and that's still allowable. So I feel like we need to be a lot more specific. And if you go back into some of the meetings, you'll see that I'm usually like, everyone will say, no, no, no. And I'm like, yes, because we don't have really a valid reason to deny it. So I think it's really important that everybody be on the same page and know that that's why we have to deny it. And I know sometimes it's just I don't like the idea, but I don't want to do it. But if it fits the code, we really have to approve it in the most cases. And that's kind of been taken out of our hands by the state. So
Commissioner Trundy, thank you for your comments. Those are dead on, and that's really what we're trying to get to. Commissioner Hutchinson, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I'm kind of wondering about like the last package that we voted on seemed like it was heading in two different directions, where part of it was the zoning up and the other was the approval of the project. And I kind of feel that to a degree, if you're looking for more clarity in our decision making, that we should probably make those two separate events. Just because in one case it's a political decision and we're sending it to council, and in the other case it's more of a legal decision that we're looking at the code and how it fits, and their project fits it, and then it would go to LUBA in case that didn't go the way that they wanted. And I think that to a degree our votes kind of got confused, and people might have wondered why I voted the way I did. It is because I felt one way about the zoning and I felt a different way about the project. But if you didn't like the project, I think that the tendency was to just vote against all of it, which, I think kind of confused maybe our motivations a little bit, because I think that if people could have stood clearly on not upzoning, then that would have just ended the conversation and we would have not have had to go any further.
Commissioner Hutchinson, excellent points, and just won't dive too deep into that decision since that's going to be on appeal, but just noting that there was a revelation, and I'm just going to go ahead and advance that discussion because it's part of this discussion, that in our code, which is another weakness of the code actually, is that type 3 and type 4 processes in our code don't automatically all roll to type 4 to the council. They're actually separate actions. And so you're 100% correct. Staff is not inclined to do further similar projects in the future because unless this code is revised, and that allows that roll up to the type 4. So that was an excellent observation in that. And I think part of that is it also creates massive complexity for this kind of Jenga puzzle thing going on with all the different layers to it. And it makes it really challenging to actually kind of unwieldy. And that was a case that started before any of our staff are here presently. That was kind of one of those that was allowed to go forward. But I think the code does need to some edits and some revisions, and kind of just since we're on that topic, just diving a little further on these items where continuances are having the record request to remain open, whether it's a type 3 or 4. Another revelation in the code is that those need to be granted by the planning commission. And so that the type 4 and 3, the 4 is kind of silent. We've run this by legal counsel. And so that's a case where just observationally, that there's not a code definitional issue where we can say, no, it's actually planning commission's decision as to whether or not we give you a continuance. It's basically a really kind of a mandate. So that's another item that is important to cover as well. So in future hearings, if somebody says, either they want to leave the record open, which is kind of odd, what they're really saying is we want a continuance. And so a lot of jurisdictions, the granting of the continuance is by discretion, and it has to be based on merits, but our code does not, it doesn't ask for those things. So those are items that this is another important element. I figured I'd just go ahead and address that as well.
However, he did not ask for a continuance. He asked to leave the record open for 40 hours. So if he had asked for a continuance, we would have voted on a continuance, but that's not what he asked. And I tried to get him to clarify, and he decided he needed to Yeah, I'm not going to say anymore.
No, and I'm just saying, thank you, Commissioner Trundy. And really our council's basically saying it doesn't matter if they ask for a record open, essentially they're asking for a continuance and we need to grant it. And so that I'll own that as staff here that, that was not something, we thought it'd all go to a 4 and be all automatically basically elevated to council, and that's not the case. And so again, there's some mechanics to this about how that works. So I don't, I think that's probably enough on that case, but just, I think.
We specifically said we can't just hold the record open for 48 hours. We can continue it to our next meeting, and he didn't want that.
Yeah, and in that part, I think that just the note to self, and not debating that at all, but just if somebody asks for the record to remain open, our council is basically saying that's a continuance request, even though in that case, that was not where that was at. I'm just letting you all know that.
Can I say something real quick?
Yep.
So I think in those situations as well, this is kind of responding to you, Jennifer, is that if staff hears that phrase, whether it's, and the whole thing was a little bizarre, but if we hear a request to hold the record open, I think staff will clarify in the future, are you asking for a continuance? And if they say yes, then we'll go from there. If they say no, then I think it'll be more clear. It was a little unwieldy for a number of reasons, and we will not be, as Don said, we're not going to be processing type 3 and 4s together again. But I listened to the meeting again, and it got a little funky, but I want to also be somewhat careful about how much we talk about Hemmerling because of potential ex parte contact scenario. If for some reason it would be kicked back to you all, and I don't think we're in that realm, but I just wanted to mention that. And I had one other comment that I wanted to say. I think you all were talking about the training and discussion, and I think to the extent that you all do participate in like a thorough discussion about what you all believe to be the merits or lack thereof of any application, the better, really. If you guys, can get into some of the nitty gritty details in between yourselves and discuss what you think appears to meet the criteria or what doesn't, we're able to write written findings better. And on the what staff can do in those situations is you can kind of put us on the spot and ask us, what is this particular code criteria talking about when you're discussing a particular item? We'll say parking in whatever zone, or does this meet the setbacks in this instance or something? Just using an example. That way we can kind of direct and hopefully provide you with the actual code language, and then you can discuss it more and decide if you think that it does, and this particular item does in fact meet that code criteria, or maybe perhaps it doesn't. That way I think the decisions will be more flushed out. And like you all had mentioned, when we're writing these findings, I don't want to have to distill personally what one of you all says in a meeting and get it wrong. Also, I don't want to mischaracterize what the Planning Commission has decided. And the more you're able to discuss the items, I think the better. So that's all I wanted to add. Sounds like you have a question, Jason.
I just have, well, yes, I have a couple regarding the code, but I don't know if you're ready for that.
Sure. Unless Don, do you have?
Well, and we need to go back to Commissioner Mills as well. So go ahead, Commissioner Patton.
So as far as meeting times for trainings, evenings during the weekday, is best. What with my work schedule and such. With some advance notice, I can do weekdays, but that is more difficult, or weekday during the day. Regarding the code, from time to time, I use because trying to going through the code for Canby, I don't reference it a lot, so knowing where all that stuff is difficult. So I use there's this American Legal Publishing Corporation. They have a copy of our code in their database, and it is searchable. So I can go in and say parking, and it brings up all references in the city code regarding parking. Is that up to date in that format, or is that old information? Do we know anything about that?
Pretty certain that's up to date, because you guys some of you may remember the telecommunications amendments that we did, and those were put into that American Legal Publishing document. I'm pretty certain that's up to date, but I can confirm as well, let you know.
Okay, excellent. The next question I have is it sounds like, Don, you've been mentioning, and I think it sounds like it's coming up with staff, that there are holes in our code that need to be fixed, and that there's things that need to be better defined. Probably as the city has grown, these holes have presented themselves. Is there the ability to either, because I know staff is super busy with all this stuff, is there a way to contract with a company that specializes in reviewing municipal codes and that sort of thing, to look at our code and say, look, based on cities of your size with X amount of growth and these different zones and such, these are some of the areas where the code needs to be improved, rather than doing, we need to fix a little here, we need to fix a little there, because it has to go through a very lengthy process each time that happens.
Great question. And I mean, the code really needs an overhaul, just to be quite honest. And I think there's some things that are on the horizon that we are kind of waiting for to do a holistic update with consultants. And that would be the housing needs assessment, which you guys haven't really even entered that arena yet. Although you probably saw it in 2019, some of you, in terms of that coming forward. But that will deal with housing types in the city, and will likely, in my opinion, probably end up altering some of our codes and residential code areas. Therefore, we were kind of waiting for that to happen. And there's also the comp plan change, which is probably about the same time period with the TSP, and those would be 2022 to 2024. However, in the meantime, the low-hanging fruit, which I think there is some of this, it's low-hanging fruit. One of these is the procedural process for planning commission. That's clearly one that's an easy one to do. Like if we brought 10 of these, I mean, right now I have a list of about 20 items. But if we brought those forward as we saw them, I mean, part of it is we kind of discover new ones each week almost. I mean, not completely, but there's just a lot of stuff that needs to be kind of corrected or made up to date, not necessarily corrected. But yes, I think we need to start bringing forward those changes to planning commission and city council in kind of bite-sized chunks. I mean, it's a big deal to bring a whole code and that might help in that future review, so you're not overwhelmed. The planning commission is like, oh my God, there's how many sections are there in the code, and you got to go through each one, and it could be fairly detailed. But I think our goal is to bring up the small, the low-hanging fruit, bring that to planning commission, and so we can address those things that are important to the day-to-day operations of what we're dealing with.
Well, I'm all for dealing with low-hanging fruit, because what I see is if we don't correct it here when we know it's a problem, then that leads to legal troubles, which leads to money out of the general fund to help pay for that. So I would prefer to spend a little time and money now to fix that, rather than having to spend a bunch of money out of it later that could go towards building a road or park or something along those lines.
Yep, absolutely.
And we did a pretty big look at the code about a year and a half ago, I want to say. Was it? Yeah, a year and a half, 2 years ago. I mean, it was in council chambers, so it was before last March. But we did we had 7-8 meetings about it and did fine tune quite a bit of it.
And Commissioner Trundy, some of these are kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation about tightening things up and making the applicant more responsible. There are some procedural things that we've already identified as staff that we would like to put in place as well, which goes towards that goal.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But just to kind of, so I don't want the commissioners who are newer to think that we haven't done anything with the code in the last 30 years. We did just have a pretty extensive update.
Sure.
I want to say it was like January to March of last year.
Sounds right.
Yeah. That we went through a lot of it and tightened it up a lot. There is still stuff to do, but they did say that they wanted to wait until these upcoming changes in other areas.
And the housing inventory looked shaky at that time, and it's proving to be one of the big points we're going to have to rework.
Thank you for the info, though. That's very helpful. And I think part of the challenge is I'm not sure if there are very many codes out there. If you went across, and compared us to other jurisdictions that don't still need tweaks, and it's just one of the natures of the code. And so just to recognize there probably will never be 100% perfection, but I think we as staff are communicating about what we could do to bring a series of these forward to help again start to address those items that we're clearly seeing. And to your point, Commissioner Patton, we definitely don't want to have legal issues. So and the only other thing I was going to kind of on that same topical area is going back to the criteria and the approval criteria is, though there will be some hearings and likely hearings that will be coming up that may be controversial in the sense that there may be testimony around those in opposition. And again, the importance of weighing that out against the code. There's some growing pains in the city, and some of that is part of that is a challenge to go through, processes, especially on residential and those issues around, changing the land, the changing landscape. And to your point, Commissioner Mills, that the housing boom kind of is in part of that challenge. So just not to go into too much detail, but just another reason to kind of echo and say, is this something that we have authority over or not? Where's our discretion? And that's where staff can come in. So there's that. And then I've got one more thing, just kind of speaking of applications, we've been trying to limit our hearings to having one hearing item per planning commission hearing. We're now getting kind of bombarded, and there are 2 hearings in June, and both hearings, June 14th and June 28th. So we've had to stack them because we're trying to deal with the 120-day rule and making sure that we're timely and getting things processed. There's also just an increased volume of hearing items that are coming. And so we appreciate everything you guys have done, but we didn't really have a choice to keep them to a singular hearing each hearing. So I just appreciate your patience. We're trying not to overload you guys with stuff. And I think that's just wanting to make you aware of that. And that may continue into July and August. We don't have that completely figured out, but June is pretty full already.
I have a quick question. So in the past, when there were a number of items coming down the pike, how was that handled meeting wise? Were there longer meetings? Were there more meetings more often? How was that done?
And this predates me, Commissioner Patton. Eric, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, my opinion has it. I'm not exactly certain on the past, but there may come a time to pass where your choices or all of our choices become having 3 meetings a night, or potentially even having additional planning commission meeting. So maybe another week.
I think you're going to have to go to more meetings and not try to pile up hearings on an individual night. I've been in that situation in the past, and we just end up with more meetings in a very busy time. I mean, you can't put too many hearings in one night. You're just gonna kill everybody's brain, and you're going to end up with a very poor product in the end. You're going to have to ask us to meet more often. That's what it'll come down to.
Yeah, and I think what Don was and we're trying to do is plant the seed that eventuality could be quite possible. We've got a lot of projects that have come in the last even couple of weeks, and I don't really see how they're going to be there. There might be times where we may need to ask you for an additional meeting, and I want to overstep my bounds here with Don, but we were talking about this and we agree having 3 complex items in one night does not sound pleasant or effective for really anybody. So it's something we should probably be in communication about with you all as these items kind of come into fruition through completeness. So.
And Eric, just to your point, and just I agree with you. And we're not sure where several appeals will end up. Hoping council will be the final decision maker. They have the ability to remand to planning commission. So there are things out there that we don't know where they're going to land completely, because council will need to make a decision on those.
So I have a quick question then, and I'm glad I'm in a Zoom meeting so that way nothing can get thrown at me. What would people's thoughts be, if things really back up, and of doing like a hearing palooza on a Saturday or something, just to know? Okay, well then never mind.
I mean, when you talk about hearing palooza, Commissioner, I'm just saying that you're going to come into a limitation on people's focus. And how many are you talking about? 2,400 pages of documents that you're going to take responsibility in a day, or 2,000 or 800? I mean,
well, I
just get to the point where, you're going to have to, you and I are going to have to look at a 500-page document or multiple 500-page documents in preparation for a triple hearing. I mean, I'm just saying that. And you think about, we've talked about how many people we have on Zoom and keeping them all straight. I mean, I just think you're going to get into a logistical nightmare. We're going to have to go to more meetings. You try to do this, I mean, I've been in cases where I've had multiple planning commission meetings per week in some cases to get out of a backlog.
And I understand that, but if there's a lot of stuff coming down the pipe, and we start our meetings at 7 or even back it up to 6 o'clock, and we can only do a couple a night, I mean, eventually you're going to run out of weeknights too. And so.
No, I don't think you will. I think you'll find you'll catch up.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked in bigger municipalities than this, and I've never seen a backlog like that we couldn't address with 2 or 3 meetings a week.
Yeah.
And that'd be an extreme step to take to go to that. I'm not suggesting we'll need to do that, but it could come down to more than one meeting every other week is what I'm saying. We might have to go for a while. Let's go to a meeting every week, for example. You might have to do that.
Yeah, this is Eric. I'm not trying to overstate the amount of public hearings we have. I don't think it's going to be that drastic, but it does look like there's some probability of basically needing some additional meeting times. And that depends basically on what Don said, if appeals are remanded. And then we've received, and my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have 6 or 7 pre-apps that we've just done recently, and they're all going to basically end out at the same time, roughly. So just wanted to forewarn you, and hopefully we don't have to overextend the planning commission too much. But
I think that if we do some of the procedural ideas that we talked about earlier, that it'll make our meetings more effective and efficient. And I think that if, we've had meetings where we've started at 7 and we've gone till 10 o'clock on one deal, which could have been done in, less than an hour if we didn't have these weird tangents and rabbit trails that we go down. So I think that staying on task on the specific topic of that hearing is going to make a big difference. I think that not following off on these sometimes strange tangents will help that. And I think having that template of this is how the meeting runs, this is what the discussion factor is, and having Larry or John step in and say, whoa, wait, stop. This is not what we're supposed to be talking about right now. Let's get back on what's going on with this specific applicant. I think that'll help. I know that back when I started on the commission, we'd have meetings that would go till 11 o'clock at night, and we would have 2 or 3 hearings in that night. Some of them were bigger, some of them were smaller. And I think having, you can't do 3 Project Shakespeare's in a night, but you could easily do 3 smaller neighborhood type of things or lot divisions or things like that in a night. I think that part of it's going to be balancing the calendar and putting the right things in the right place. And then not, we have a couple right now that have been continued that I don't know when they're going to come back up. But if the applicant isn't ready, then that pushes them to the back of the line. So.
Commissioner Mills, did you have other things to add to that?
Well, getting back to the comment I was going to make a long time ago about training, and that is one point was that when I came onto this commission, which was now, I think this is my 3rd year, I had one training opportunity and it was provided by a state organization and it was very good. But I feel like we haven't done a good job of training, I'm going to say both our new and our experienced commissioners. I mean, we always tend to focus on, well, the new guys need to find out, new people need to find out what does the commissioner do and all this. And that's all very important and we need to do that. But I'd also offer that the experienced commissioners could certainly use a refresher and reinforced guidance on what they need to be looking at and how to make sure we're doing things in as efficient a manner and as an unappealable or where we'll win our appeals too. So we make sure we make sound decisions, we make them timely. So I think that gets back to not only training the newbies, but the more experienced people too. And I'm speaking with somebody that's got, I've been on the planning commission, this is my 11th year. So I think more training is really good. I would hope some of it would end up before too much longer would be in person, but if it has to be on Zoom, it will be.
And Commissioner Mills, I think, just maybe from what you said, it's another source here. I mean, in addition to staff putting this on, I mean, there may be some American Planning Association webinar stuff. And again, that would be perhaps given the COVID situation, maybe an opportunity. I'd love to have you guys all in the same room to be able to virtual room to be able to discuss this. I don't know logistically what everybody's schedule is, but let us as staff look at opportunities. There's some excellent training. I've been to some of these myself where it's like training planning commissioners in both Oregon and Washington do that. And they do it quite well. And they have people that come in and kind of like the landscape of what's supposed to be done and the procedurals, those kinds of things. And they're generally half a day to a day. But that's a big commitment, and I get it. I think that, but we'll try to provide some options, and I'll explore that. I'll take the lead on that, and then one of those obviously is having staff do that, which would be great. But there may be a combination here.
Some of them are pretty fundamental, like Robert's Rules of Order. It would all help if we all would do a better job as commissioners in internalizing Robert's Rules of Order. I think that would help smooth meetings out, make sure all the comments are there, and also help the meetings to proceed.
Yep, no, exactly. And I'm in agreement with you. And so let us do some research on that piece. And I think that would be helpful to try to figure out options that fit everybody's schedule.
Well, and along the lines of Robert's Rules of Order, I think it's also important to decide what format of Robert's Rules of Order we're using, because there's different forms that various organizations can adopt of it, either a hard and fast form of Robert's Rules of Order, or I think if we're going to talk about Robert's Rules of Order, we really need to establish what form we're going to use. Because otherwise, then you have people who get onto these commissions and these governing bodies that will use it as a tool to control a meeting or subjugate other members of the group. And I do not want. I've had that happen to me before in student governing organizations, and I am not a fan of it happening ever again.
All good points. And could I jump back to one thing about, what I think the other thing we need to keep you guys, all of you, apprised of is kind of going back to the hearing discussion about forecasting what those are going to be. I think staff needs to look at that more specifically to give you an idea of what that is. So if there is a need to have special hearings, that we start to decide what that is. Summer's coming, people are going to take vacations, and I get that. And it's kind of not ideal necessarily when the weather's great, to be adding more things to people's plate. So I'm just pointing that out. We're here, we'll be going through this obviously, but you guys are volunteers. I want to recognize that. But I think we need to forecast a little more clearly. Everybody is super anxious to get their projects done. Canby has definitely become on the radar screen, if it was not already on the radar screen for development. I mean, there's a large number of reasons for that. I think, and we're just trying to accommodate people to the extent we can, but it's kind of a nonstop thing. I mean, we've seen more, we kind of see waves, and now it seems like it's kind of just continuous.
I have two statements. One, any board I've ever been on has had like a annual or every half year retreat type of thing. I'm more than happy to give up like a half a Saturday or something to do some type of training. I don't have a problem with that, as long as it's efficient and effective and not a waste of time. And the other thing is that, and I'd have to look because I didn't before coming into this meeting because I didn't know what we were going to talk about. What are our rules on quorum, and does the entire planning commission need to be at every hearing, or could we split into two panels and split things up that way, where maybe half the panel meets one week with whatever the hearings are that week and the other half meets the other? I don't know what the code says on that or what the guidelines are, but that could be a way of handling it where we, everybody's still every other week, but we flip it. And so there's more, but that puts a lot more on staff to do like an every week meeting, but it might work if it's allowed.
Commissioner Trendy, I don't know personally. I'm not sure if Eric does. That may be something we need to look into and circle back with you guys on because that's not something I know off the top of my head.
Quorum in this body is 4 people. So that would be tricky, but certainly possible.
So is there a limit on how many planning commissioners we have? If we're going to be doing some code changes and revisions, maybe it's something that we add a couple of seats and then have 4 and 4 on a panel to be able to, if we need to add time for hearings, we do it that way.
That would be, I think that would probably require an alteration. This part I'm leaving my knowledge, but I assume there's something in the city's bylaws or charter about what's the appropriate amount of planning commissioners. And that sounds like it might be pretty difficult to achieve, but with something we could look into for sure.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the number of commissioners is built into the charter. And
okay, I just was wondering.
Change.
That's a good question.
I'm trying to think outside the box.
No, exactly. I mean, And I think that we're going to start to see things not quite as intense, but it's just what feels like we're ramping up. And that's not surprising over the summer. That's kind of what every time, we get into summer, that's when construction kind of goes really heavy.
Don, you don't need to sugarcoat it for us. We can see everything that's going on. We know it's coming. You don't have to like dance around the subject. You can just say there's a lot coming down the pipe.
Well, and I think that if we have some different guidelines as to how, if they have to prepare a PowerPoint and those type of things, we might see some people self-select to delay a little.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I think people, there's some education behind that. I agree. I mean, it's this balance between trying to be customer friendly and, also require people to do things and, transition them into kind of the more traditional way of how things are done. And we obviously want to push in that direction. We also have the 120-day rule to consider as well. So, we're kind of trying to be all things to all people to some degree, but I think that we definitely want to push to those ideas that Planning Commission identified. And I do agree that restructuring is in my opinion, could be a huge change that would be for the better, which, might shorten the hearings even if we could just kind of get to the point of like having the applicant take more responsibility.
I have one other potential passive training opportunity that might be useful that I could send to you all. And I put it in the chat, but I can send it to your emails. It's a DLCD and Oregon Planning Association Planning Commissioner's Handbook. And it's actually very well written. And it kind of just goes like through what your job as a commissioner is. It talks about components of Robert's Rule of Order, procedures for quasi-judicial hearings, making findings. It's not super long. It's obviously not, may not be the most entertaining read that you've ever, picked up, but I could send that link to you. It's free. I could even probably print it out for you and give you a hard copy if you'd prefer that. And just along the lines of training, if that's useful.
And Eric, I think that'd be a great idea. We have another book that is more substantial that we are looking at as staff today called The Job of the Planning Commissioner. It's not as light of a read, but depending on this is our goal, is to not burden you guys down with more stuff and hopefully have it abbreviated. And so Eric, excellent suggestion.
I would like it if you could email the link because I will lose it if I try to pull it out of the chat.
Yeah, I'll email it to all of you tomorrow. And Don said, we have this book also that's from APA, the American Planning Association. It's a little more beefy, but yeah, Brianna has it. And it's also pretty useful. I mean, this is like kind of like basic guidebooks that would be useful to read and catch up on while we try and find like a direct training opportunity for you all. So just a thought. Some more homework.
Yeah, because I don't have enough dry reading to do.
Yeah.
We'll try to keep it to a minimum. And those were kind of really all of our points. We super appreciate you guys' time tonight. I'm sorry this went a little bit long, which felt like was important to dive into this. I just, and I think it's just important that we give you guys the tools that you need. And that's really the kind of the focus here is wanting to make this easier, on you and also if whatever we can do to support that process. So I felt like the conversation was good. I really appreciate your recommendations. Took copious notes here, and we have a to-do list of items to circle back with you guys on.
Do any of you guys have any other questions?
Been a busy night.
Do I have them? That's everything, right, Don?
That's everything. We don't have anything on number 5, Larry. So I think we can just skip that one. So we could go to adjournment if you would. Yeah, please.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. This is Jason.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any nays? All
Aye.
right.
Sorry, had to wait for the dog to quit barking.
Is that a nay, Jennifer?
No, it was an I. I I couldn't unmute quick enough because my dog was barking at skateboarders.
All right. Well, we're done, guys. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.